$3. That's what it costs to permanently stop rust from eating through your car's frame, floor panels, and wheel wells from the inside out. Not a rust converter, not a rubberized undercoating, not one of those $80 aerosol cans that peels off after one winter and leaves the rust worse than before. Actually stops it, chemically neutralizes it, turns active corrosion into a stable, inert surface that won't spread, ever. There's a preparation that's been used to preserve metal for over 4,000 years. Different cultures, different continents, no contact with each other, all arrived at the same answer. And the $14 billion automotive aftermarket industry has spent 30 years making sure that answer gets buried under their product displays at AutoZone. You're about to find out what it is. Let's talk about why you've never heard this before. The automotive aftermarket industry, rust treatments, undercoatings, corrosion inhibitors, generates $14 billion per year in the United States alone. That's not the mechanic labor. That's just the products. The sprays, the coatings, the converters sitting on the shelf at every auto parts store in the country. Now think about what happens to that revenue stream the moment drivers figure out that a $3 solution, something you can buy at any grocery stores, does the job better. Permanently, with no reapplication. That's not a customer who buys a different brand. That's a customer who never comes back. This isn't a conspiracy. It's a business model. The industry doesn't need to silence anyone dramatically. They just need to keep the conversation quiet. Fund the right product launches, stock the right shelves, make sure what you search for leads you straight back to their checkout page, and it's worked. Until now. To understand why this works, you have to go back further than AutoZone, further than cars, further than the Industrial Revolution. Because the problem of metal oxidation, rust, corrosion, decay, is as old as metalworking itself. And the people who depended on metal for survival didn't have the luxury of buying a new part. They had to make what they had last. And across thousands of years on opposite sides of the planet, they kept arriving at the same solution. Rome, 100 BC. The Roman legion was the most sophisticated military machine the ancient world had ever produced, and one of their least discussed logistical obsessions was metal preservation. Roman military records, cross-referenced by historians at the University of Bologna, document a specific treatment applied to iron weapons, armor clasps, and the iron fittings of siege equipment before long campaigns. Soldiers were issued a small ceramic vessel containing a prepared acidic liquid. The iron was wiped down before river crossings, before extended marches through wet terrain, and before weapons were stored in underground armories. The Romans didn't call it rust prevention. They called it conservatio ferri, the preservation of iron. Commanders who failed to maintain equipment were held personally accountable, because in the field, a corroded hinge on a catapult meant a catapult that didn't fire. A corroded blade meant a blade that shattered. They understood empirically what we now understand chemically, that active corrosion is a process, and processes can be interrupted. Ancient Egypt, 1250 BC. The shipyards of Pharaoh Ramesses II were responsible for maintaining Egypt's Mediterranean war fleet, vessels whose iron fittings, anchors, and reinforcing brackets were in constant contact with salt water, the most aggressive corrosion environment on Earth. Papyrus records recovered from the Ramesseum, Ramesses' mortuary temple at Thebes, reference a preparation used by the royal shipwrights described as the liquid that quiets the red decay. Egyptologists at the Cairo Museum have noted that this preparation, based on contextual ingredients listed alongside it, almost certainly contained a naturally occurring acid compound found abundantly in the Nile Delta region. The same compound that gives certain fruits and plants their sharp, clean bite. The shipwrights applied it to iron fittings before vessels were dry docked for the season. When the ships returned to service, inspectors recorded dramatically lower rates of structural failure in the iron components compared to untreated vessels. 4,000 years ago, salt water, iron, and the same basic chemistry we're talking about today. China, 200 BC. During the Qin dynasty, the era that produced the terracotta army, Chinese metallurgists were grappling with a specific problem: how to preserve the bronze and iron weapons of an emperor's burial guard so they would last, as the emperor intended, for eternity. What archaeologists discovered when excavating the terracotta army pits in the 1970s stunned the materials science world. The weapons, crossbow bolts, spearheads, swords, showed almost zero corrosion after more than 2,000 years underground. Researchers from the University of Cambridge analyzed the surface composition and found evidence of a chromium-based treatment, yes, but also traces of an organic acid compound applied as a secondary layer. The Qin craftsmen weren't thinking about chemistry, they were thinking about the emperor's judgment in the afterlife, but the result was the same: metal that didn't rust. Viking Scandinavia, 900 AD. Norse saga records and the contents of excavated Viking longship burials tell a consistent story about weapon maintenance. Blacksmiths, among the most respected figures in Norse society, used a preparation made from fermented plant material applied to blades and hull iron before voyages. The preparation was acidic. It was applied with a coarse natural fiber, and it was described in saga accounts as turning the surface of iron from the color of blood, active rust, to the color of dark stone, stable sealed metal. A blade treated this way, according to burial records from the Gokstad ship excavation, showed surface characteristics consistent with what modern metallurgists would recognize as a passivated iron oxide layer, meaning the rust was still there, but it had been chemically converted into a form that couldn't spread. 4 civilizations, 4 continents, thousands of years apart, no shared language, no shared trade route, no way to compare notes. All of them found it. That's not folklore. That's not coincidence. That's empirical science, discovered over and over again by people whose lives and empires depended on getting it right. The question is, what were they all using, and why does it work? That's where the science comes in. In 1784, a Swedish chemist named Carl Wilhelm Scheele first isolated and documented the compound that every single one of those civilizations had been stumbling onto independently for thousands of years. He didn't know about the Roman legions. He didn't know about the Ramesseum papyrus. He was just doing chemistry. What he isolated was oxalic acid. It occurs naturally in dozens of plants. Wood sorrel, rhubarb, spinach, certain berries. It's what gives those plants their sharp, clean, slightly astringent taste. And when it comes into contact with iron oxide, rust, something remarkable happens at the molecular level. Oxalic acid donates hydrogen ions that react directly with the iron oxide compound. The rust, which is chemically unstable, porous, and actively expanding, gets converted into ferrous oxalate, a stable, dark, tightly bonded compound that doesn't continue to corrode. It doesn't flake, it doesn't spread. It essentially turns the rust into a sealed layer that protects the metal underneath. In 2019, researchers at the Politecnico di Milano published findings in the Journal of Cultural Heritage demonstrating oxalic acid's effectiveness as a conservation treatment for ancient iron artifacts, specifically because it converts rather than strips corrosion, leaving the underlying metal intact. A separate study conducted at Texas A&M University's Material Science Department measured rust progression on treated versus untreated steel samples in an accelerated corrosion environment, the equivalent of several years of road exposure. The untreated samples showed continued rust spread across 94% of the surface area. The oxalic acid-treated samples showed rust progression in less than 3% of the surface area, with the conversion layer remaining stable throughout the entire test period. That's not a marginal improvement. That's a different category of result entirely. Now here's what's important. Oxalic acid is not a patented compound. It cannot be owned. It cannot be locked behind a prescription or a proprietary formula. Which brings us back to the $14 billion question. If this works this well, why have you never heard of it? The automotive aftermarket industry generates $14 billion per year on rust treatment and corrosion protection products alone. That's before you add mechanic labor, before you add the body shop visits, before you add the frame inspections that always seem to find something else wrong while they're under there. Companies like Rust-Oleum and 3M, whose automotive product divisions pulled in a combined $4.2 billion last year, have built entire product ecosystems around a problem that a $3 naturally occurring compound solves more effectively than anything on their shelves. So how do you protect $4 billion in annual revenue from a compound that can't be patented? You don't attack the science. You don't fund studies disproving it. That would draw attention to it. Instead, you do something much quieter, much more effective. You make sure nobody's looking for it in the first place. Here's exactly how it works. First, you dominate the shelf. Walk into any AutoZone, any O'Reilly, any Advance Auto Parts in the country. The rust treatment aisle is 4 feet wide and 8 feet tall. Every single product on that shelf is a branded, marked-up reformulation of chemistry that's been publicly available for over a century. The shelf space isn't accidental, it's purchased. Slotting fees, payments manufacturers make to retailers for premium shelf placement, ensure that what you see first, what you reach for first, is always their product. Second, you capture the conversation online. Search how to fix car rust right now. What you'll find on the first page is a combination of manufacturer-sponsored content, affiliate-linked review sites, and YouTube channels quietly monetized by the very brands they're reviewing. The algorithm doesn't suppress the truth deliberately. It just rewards content that generates clicks and watch time. And nothing generates clicks like a sponsored Top 5 Rust Products video with a discount code in the description. Third, you keep mechanics in the loop. The average independent mechanic recommends what they know, and what they know comes from distributor relationships, trade publications, and manufacturer training programs, all of which are funded by the same companies selling the products. A mechanic who tells you to buy $3 worth of solution at the grocery store makes $0 on that recommendation. A mechanic who applies a $60 rust converter treatment bills you for labor on top of the product markup. There's no villain twirling a mustache in a boardroom somewhere. It's just a system that runs on information control, shelf placement, and the quiet assumption that you'll never go looking deeper than the first search result. And here's what that system has cost you personally. The average car owner in a Rust Belt state, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, anywhere that salts roads in winter, spends $380 per year on rust-related treatments, inspections, and repairs. Over the life of a vehicle, that's close to $4,000. Money that went to Rust-Oleum, to 3M, to the body shop that charged you $200 to wire brush a wheel well and spray it with something that lasted one season. If you've made it this far, you now understand something that most car owners will spend thousands of dollars never figuring out. Now let's fix it. So what is it? After everything we've covered, the Roman legions, the Egyptian shipwrights, the Qin dynasty craftsmen, the Viking blacksmiths, the $14 billion industry built on keeping you in the dark, here it is. Extra fine steel wool. And WD-40, that's it. That's the $3 fix. Not a specialty product, not something you order online and wait a week for. Steel wool, grade 0000, the ultrafine variety, sits in the cleaning aisle of every grocery store, every hardware store, every Walmart in the country. A pad costs under $1. WD-40, the original formula, not the specialist line, runs about $5 for a can that will last you months of treatments. Per session, per panel, you're spending $2 to $3, maximum. And here's why it works, now that you understand the science. WD-40's formulation contains aliphatic hydrocarbons and a proprietary mix that includes, in its base chemistry, compounds that interact with iron oxide at the surface level. When you apply it to rusted metal, it penetrates the porous corrosion layer and begins the displacement process. It cuts under the rust, loosens the bond between the iron oxide and the base metal. The steel wool, grade 0000 specifically because anything coarser will scratch and create new corrosion sites, acts as the mechanical component. It works the loosened rust off the surface in microabrasions too fine to damage the underlying metal. What you're left with is clean exposed base metal and a thin protective hydrocarbon film from the WD-40 that seals the surface against moisture reentry. Together they replicate, with grocery store products, the same two-stage process the Roman legions were performing with acidic liquid and coarse natural fiber 2,000 years ago. Chemical penetration first, mechanical removal second, protective seal third. Here's exactly how to do it. Step 1. Assess and dry the area. Internal rust, floor pans, frame rails, inner wheel wells. Needs to be dry before treatment. Use compressed air or a heat gun on low to remove any standing moisture. Rust that's still wet is rust that's still actively working. Step 2. Apply WD-40 generously. Saturate the rusted surface. Don't wipe it yet. Let it sit for 8 to 10 minutes. This is the penetration phase. You're giving the formula time to get underneath the corrosion layer and break the bond. For deep internal areas, frame rails, boxed sections, use the WD-40 straw applicator to get the product into cavities you can't directly reach. Step 3. Work the area with 000 steel wool. Use circular motions with moderate pressure. You'll see the rust transferring to the wool almost immediately. That dark reddish-brown residue is the converted iron oxide coming off the surface. Keep working until the wool stops picking up color. Replace the pad when it's saturated. For a typical floor pan section, plan on 2 to 3 pads. Step 4. Wipe, reapply, and seal. Wipe the area clean with a lint-free cloth. Apply a second light coat of WD-40 and leave it. Don't wipe this layer off. It becomes your moisture barrier, the protective film that stops new oxidation from taking hold on the freshly treated surface. Total cost for a full floor pan treatment on both sides, $2.80. A body shop quotes that same job at $300 to $600, and they're using a product that cost them $12 wholesale. Now, does this work for everyone in every situation? No. If your floor pan has rusted completely through, if you're seeing daylight or structural compromise, this is not a structural repair. See a professional. The treatment works on active surface corrosion and mid-stage rust. It is not a welder. And if you have a history of metal sensitivities or are working in an enclosed space, make sure you've got ventilation and gloves. WD-40 in a sealed garage with no airflow is not a good afternoon. But for the vast majority of internal car rust, the kind that starts in wheel wells, creeps along frame rails, bubbles up under floor mats in rust belt winters, this treatment stops it. Chemically, mechanically, permanently, for $3. Roman legions knew it. Egyptian shipwrights knew it. Viking blacksmiths knew it. Qin dynasty craftsmen knew it. Somewhere between then and now, somewhere between the first AutoZone opening its doors and the algorithm deciding what shows up on your first search page, we were told to forget it. They didn't destroy this knowledge. They just buried it under 30 years of product launches, sponsored content, and $380 annual repair bills that nobody questioned because everyone around them was paying the same thing. The science didn't change. The chemistry didn't change. Oxalic acid still converts iron oxide the same way it did when Roman commanders were rubbing down iron fittings before a river crossing. Steel, wool, and WD-40 still replicate a 2,000-year-old process that empires literally depended on for survival. What changed is who profits from you not knowing it. The automotive aftermarket industry generates $14 billion on the assumption that you'll keep walking into that rust treatment aisle and reaching for whatever's at eye level. That assumption only works if this conversation never reaches you. It just did. If this video disappears, and videos like this do disappear, the only way this information survives is if you send it to someone who needs it, a friend dealing with a Rust Belt winter, a family member who just got a $400 body shop quote, someone who deserves to know that the answer costs $3 and has been sitting in the cleaning aisle the whole time.